quite complicated. And we started thinking about how it would be for many of those students who are onshore stranded, um, getting quite anxious. And I then put a post out on my LinkedIn profile around kindness, because it took me back to the time when I landed as an international student in Glasgow in September of 2000. I had by then got 2.5 years of work experience living in another city away from my hometown in India. And I had just put my life into 2 suitcases and had left India to go and study again, my second master's at the University of Strathclyde. And I have to admit, my first month at Strathclyde was really difficult for me because I was homesick. I could not, I mean, you know, the most stark memory of my first month in Glasgow was I couldn't bring myself to read a map, because wherever I would turn, they would give me a map and they would say, okay, here is how you would navigate to this building or that building for a class. This is, you know, there was no pandemic. Everybody was out and about. Everyone was there to help you. I still kind of pined for a familiar face. I pined for familiar smells, familiar food, hear the voices of loved ones. This was before, video calls and so on. Mobile phones had just about started making a dent in our lives. And so I started thinking about my time as a student. And I felt that, you know, the one thing that made a big difference to me as I tried to integrate into the Glaswegian landscape was meeting kind people. Kindness in classroom, kindness amongst my tutors, kindness amongst the staff who supported international students, and so on and so forth. As we navigate through this pandemic situation, which is a new abnormal, as I would call it, and I think when humanity emerges on the other side, we will be facing a very different world. Now more than ever, channeling kindness is a very important aspect of how we live. And international students have been such a big part of the strategies that recipient institutions have pulled together to diversify their campuses, to keep many subjects afloat, where home students were not interested, and so on and so forth. Now more than ever, how you treat those international students who are stranded on campuses and in your cities would make a huge difference around the narratives that would emerge as we emerge from the COVID-19 situation. And it was very interesting to have this conversation with Delia, primarily because Delia had spent 25 years in the international sector, running the Directorate of International for University of Northampton, and running 5 offices around the world, and wearing the hat of Dean of Students, living on campus for 15 plus years with 2,000 odd students. So I thought on this particular topic, there is no better person than Delia to share some of her insights as international officers around the world grapple with this scenario. Delia has also lived through the SARS crisis as Director of International. So there are many nuggets in her work experience that people like us could really kind of, dip into and use to understand how we support international students who are currently in isolation, trying to study, offline using online, or off campus using online mediums, and so on and so forth. So I just want, this imagery on the first, the introductory slide that you see, we put some thought into selecting this imagery because it shows social distancing. This is where we are. This is how it is going to be till we find a cocktail of drugs or a vaccine for COVID-19. We have spent some time thinking through various different topics, and we hope that you would, at the end of this discussion, come away spending some time thinking about some of those key topics of importance for international students. There is a chat box on this Zoom conference bridge. Please, we would be delighted if you could kind of use the chat box to drop your questions, and Delia and I could kind of take some of those questions.
Okay, thank you, Lakshmi. I'll just say hello before we start onto the content. It's a real pleasure to be talking to you this evening, as Lakshmi said. And just to say that, yes, when I was with my UK university and with the US university that I worked with, I was Director of International, PVC International, but also an academic, and for 15 years, Dean of Students. And it was an amazing combination to have, and I felt it was a really unique and powerful combination to have, because I was there with the students over the weekend and in the holidays, and when SARS hit, when we had, you know, awful tragedies, terrorist attacks. So, you know, I was there even for the, you know, the individual challenges and tragedies that you always have. So it was always important to me to be involved with my students and to try as much as possible to make sure that the experience that we sold them when we were overseas was the experience they had when they came to campus. And, you know, looking after the students was very important for us. And, you know, now, even many years after I've sort of moved on to other jobs, I still have that amazing contact with students who, in fact, I bumped into one in Frankfurt Airport just in January when I was coming back, and I hadn't seen him for 10 years. And he remembered when we brought him them cricket stumps to play cricket with, because they didn't have any. So kindness can make a difference, and particularly at this time when we're all going through a period of, you know, the unknown, because none of us know where this is going. And I think, as Lakshmi said, when she arrived as an international student, how homesick students are. Certainly in many of the countries that we work with, students will have just arrived in January and February. So they're only a few weeks in, and all of a sudden, this all happens. So we wanted to talk to you about why kindness is important. And I'm going to let Lakshmi take you through the contents. We've brainstormed and come up with things we think might be helpful to talk about. And we're really looking forward to hearing from you at the end with questions and sharing your experiences and ideas and solutions as well, because this is what it's about, sharing.
Thank you, Delia. So first thing is, you know, why kindness is important, because, you know, this is an unknown that we are all kind of navigating, and collectively, suddenly, the entire world has got a common problem, and that has got impact known and unknown, anticipated and unanticipated. For example, in India, I don't know if some of you all have seen this in the news. We went into a lockdown mode, and then suddenly migrant laborers and daily wage earners started migrating out of our cities back to their villages, because they were saying that, you know, it won't be coronavirus that would be killing us, it would be hunger. Nobody, not even the government, had anticipated that mass movement of human beings from one city to, you know, back to their village. It was almost like a scene akin to partition. When India and Pakistan were divided, you know, we had mass movement of people like this. So there are so many knock-on effects that we haven't all planned for. We didn't even know that we would live through this time. So, you know, in that context, thinking of another individual with the truth and looking at them through the kindness lens is so important. There are so many aspects around this. Studying, which has, you know, in a matter of 2 weeks, universities have had to transition their students to remote teaching. So how do you kind of make sure that their experience is you know, in many ways connected to what it would have been, you know, otherwise. Tutor support. Many students are in isolation, so how are they kind of coping with finding food, which is a very, very important concern for all of us, even those who are sat at home, trying to find groceries and provisions. Financial stress. There are many students who are dependent on their part-time jobs to make sure that they are taking care of their living expenses. Visa situation. Delia and I conducted a session for the Irish sector 2 days ago. And one question was around, the visa situation for international students. So we'll touch upon that. How do you build communities online? Because we have all become isolated. We are not having the ability to kind of connect face to face, or see another person other than virtually. Healthcare, what if they become ill with COVID-19 or any other illness and they need hospital care, and hospitals are overwhelmed and countries are in lockdown. And then some examples of kindness initiatives taken by some of the institutions that we support, and also institutions that we are kind of, we are mapping that out because we want to bring out a kindness digest. Because good news these days is hard to come by. We go to bed figuring that this is one scenario, but we wake up to a different scenario every day, and that level of uncertainty, I think some level of good news is always great. So in that context, I thought a quote by Franklin Roosevelt is quite timely. Because it's, he said, human kindness has never weakened the stamina or softened the fiber of a free people. A nation does not have to be cruel to be tough. And it is, in the context of something that Delia and I came across this morning from Australia, around the Australian Prime Minister saying that students who can't fend for them, international students who can't fend for themselves should leave Australia because Australia needs to focus on its citizens. And we both felt that, that messaging can be quite scary for international students because, there might be some who can't afford to kind of, leave for some strange reason. So all of that messaging that goes out of a country to the whole wide world can have an impact as we emerge from the situation on the other side. So, Delia, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say on that particular point. I mean, obviously, Australia is a country where international education is a huge part of their economy, and many of the institutions, in fact, all of the institutions, are working really, really hard to look after their international students because they know how important it is. And messaging that's coming out from the government or from other bodies that shows that maybe that is not something that they are prioritizing can be very damaging for what is a key economic activity. So that was something that was that we thought was quite interesting to see. And I'm sure that the people in Australian universities who are moving mountains to look after their students found that not very helpful. I think the other thing that I would add here about this compassion, care and problem solving is that I know lots of agencies and universities are doing huge amounts to look after students. We've got fantastic colleagues around the globe who are doing incredible stuff to make sure that students are cared for. But what we sometimes hear is that, yes, there's all of this that's there and everyone's saying it's fantastic, but I can't access it. I've got this problem and I don't know that anyone's there to help me. So it is very much about individual problem solving, as well as having all the systems and processes in place that allow the sector bodies and the governments to put out there that this is what we're doing. Because in today's connected world, something goes viral very, very quickly. And we saw something yesterday that was very interesting in this context. A group of Indian students had reached out to somebody from the local community, the local Indian community, and said, our university isn't looking after us. You know, we're here, we're abandoned, there's nothing happening to care for us. So this person put something up on LinkedIn about that. The universities immediately respond and say, there's lots of, they haven't come and told us. We hadn't heard from them. If they don't tell us, we can't help them. So it's, you know, but that was not great because they were doing things to help, but they still got all that negativity out there about that. Now they then moved in and sort of fixed that problem. But it's just an example of where you've got all these systems, you've got everything organized, but those individuals are still not necessarily seeing it that way. So I think it is always about and you know, being aware that that there may always be these pitfalls in front of you, and to try and make sure. And we've got some ideas around that as we move through the presentation, how you can try and avoid that type of situation. Not always easy.
So, you know, as universities and other higher educational institutions have had to suddenly change the mode of teaching, they have had to transition into online mode within a matter of weeks. And we know that usually these kind of initiatives in larger bureaucracies like our universities are, take at least a minimum of 12 to 15 months with, you know, implementation and testing and so on. All of that is now being, you know, done mid-flight. You're transitioned and then you're problem solving. Your you know, professors, many of whom are wonderful teachers face to face, are struggling because they've never had to perform, because, you know, I'm using the word perform very deliberately, without having an audience in front of them. They can't see the students and they are talking to a camera, and it is so difficult. But in the, you know, from the student perspective, as they are studying remotely, there are many things to kind of consider. Students study at different pace, don't they, Delia? As a professor of law, what do you
Definitely. I think that, and I think the first thing is don't take anything for granted, as Lakshmi said. And this is the feedback that we're getting from the students that we're talking to, and I'm sure that you're many of you are aware of this as well. They've got different physical environments. They don't necessarily have, you know, the luxury of great connectivity. They may not have the infrastructure if they're living in shared accommodation and they're all trying to do different things at times. These things can be challenging. They can mean that, you know, the student is going to be very anxious and stressed and may not perform to their best, which then makes them worry again. It's not something that, you know, that you can wave a magic wand and make disappear, because this is a reality, and we've had to do this to try and at least allow students to complete their courses. We know that, but I think it's don't take anything for granted. This morning I was reading from one of our clients in New Zealand, the University of Auckland, where they've put on 200 laptops because they discovered that everything had gone online, but there were students that didn't have laptops. I was quite surprised that was the case, but that's the reality. We can't take anything for granted. So just because everything's gone online doesn't mean every student will be able to access it in the way they need to. And as Lakshmi said, the challenges are students will adapt to this at a different pace. They will learn in different ways. We have, you know, one of the fantastic things about the higher education sector is the diversity, and the fact that not all students are millennial sort of, you know, tech natives. So you will have that spectrum where you've got students who maybe are not quite as tech savvy as others. So thinking about the support that they need around them for that as well. The other things that students will have lots of questions around is, how do I do group work? Is that going to be more difficult now? And we all know that students often find group work challenging anyway. And so now doing it this way, is that going to be more difficult? We are very, very lucky in one sense you know, that we have all these amazing platforms now. If this had happened a few years ago, we wouldn't have been able to have these solutions. So, and I was talking to a colleague this morning who does a lot of work in China, and he was just talking about how the number of different platforms has mushroomed in the past 8 weeks, and there are so many different things she's never even heard of that people are now accessing and using to be able to connect with each other, to study, and to be able to move their world forward. Students will be very worried about the impact this will have on their academic performance. If you are a student and this is your, you know, you're coming up to just past mid-semester and you've got your sort of semester exams coming up, you'll be really worried about whether you're going to be able to achieve what you hoped you would achieve, because this will disrupt you in so many different ways. And so universities need to think about things around appeals processes, around how you would alleviate some of those concerns that students have if this does mean that they're not able to perform as they expected. And then I think there is also, you know, just very quickly to touch on the access to learning resources, labs it's not possible anymore, and people are being incredibly creative in how they're translating some of the things that you would never have thought would go online into online. So there is incredible creativity and commitment going on, and so many resources out there that people can access and use, and people are sharing to be able. This will make a huge difference to our sector and will accelerate a lot of things that were on their way, but we will see impact much more quickly because of this. And so, you know, we will see I think a very different sector when we come out the other side in terms of how we incorporate online and digital into our student experience. So there's always positive things to come out of it. And I'm just going to finish and say about the issue is, though, around that students who are on courses are possibly grateful that they've got the online option to finish, but students who are thinking about starting courses may not be as keen to embrace online. So this webinar is about students who you've already got on your campuses and in your institutions, but it is something to bear in mind that, that we're sort of hearing it from the students on the ground here, that maybe they will think about deferring, taking the next intake, not necessarily keen to start online. But you know, we don't know yet, because as Lakshmi said, tomorrow we'll wake up and there'll be a different day for us all and a different problem. I think the other thing that I want to talk about with online learning is that good academic tutor support. You're going to see that there'll be more need for one-on-one virtual sessions with faculty members to support students, obviously more group virtual sessions, much more in terms of tutor groups and seminars to try and ensure that students get what they need. It's not just about though tutor to tutor. You will be able to use peer support group to help students through this and to learn. And certainly I know lots of work has been done in the UK around mentoring and peer support in the virtual space. There's huge amounts of resources available in many of our countries where we have our client universities. The UK is obviously one I know more about, and so the resources available there for this are available to support you in how you build those peer groups. Assessments will be a big concern. Students will be anxious about how they'll be assessed and what can replace exams. So again, that will be something where academic advice will be really important there, and access to academic advisors to talk to students about those will be part of this whole package. And then finally, virtual non-academic pastoral support. That's going to be hugely important to students, and is really very much part of this this kindness topic that we're looking at. And it is important to access it not just through office hours, because emergencies and problems arise outside of office hours. So having emergency phone numbers that students can access, where they can get advice, even if it's not 9 to 5. Very, very important. And as Lakshmi was saying,
I was just kind of thinking, you know, I was thinking of the story that you shared of you running around to organize breakfast for your international students who had landed up in some accommodation where there was no provision for breakfast. Talk to us about that. Obviously, that was, you know, that's a time when you had access to, you know, groceries, and, you know, you could do things at short notice.
I could go to Waitrose on that occasion, but yes, this was a situation where we'd had a very big increase in our intake, and we were juggling accommodation. Students were, you know, finding it difficult to find private sector accommodation. The university accommodation was full, and we were bringing on stream some sort of temporary accommodation that we took on, which didn't have any catering facilities. It also had 300 steps and no lift up to, it was on top of a fire station, which made it interesting. But so we very, very quickly, suddenly someone realized we've got them somewhere to sleep, but they can't eat anything. And they were far away from the university halls of residence catering. So it was a question of jumping in the car with the director of student services, and we went and we bought out Waitrose and Asda and Sainsbury's, big supermarkets in the UK, of all of the bread, jam, breakfast cereal, Danish pastries, and any sticky bun we could get our hands on. So it is one of those really important things. And in this context, of course, there may not be easy access to food. We've seen a great example of one of the TAFE institutions in Australia, and they've had a great photograph of their basement grocery shop, totally set up for students by the institution. And the students can go in, they can get their groceries there. And what was really nice is it wasn't just the basics, it wasn't just bags of rice and pasta and stuff like that. They really thought this through. There were treats and sweets and all sorts of things. And so every week students could go in and get a bag of groceries there. So it's very, very important to think about that, particularly, for example, for our American universities, where many students will have meal plans. And so they've paid, and if the halls of residence are shut, are those meal plans going to be refunded? Is that money refunded? Is it refunded quickly enough? Because the student might not have enough money to be able to have that gap filled. So they're important things to think about. And then we've seen,
you know, as an international student, obviously, you know, at normal times you are thinking, you know, I want to eat a specific cuisine because, you know, you miss home food and, you know, all of that. But right now, even those of us with a roof on our heads and, you know, having the access to funds and so on, in many places people are in a survival mode because grocery shops have, you know, people are hoarding and, you know, things have emptied out. But it's all the more reason for universities and higher educational institutions to think this element through. And in that context, that TAFE photograph that they had posted was very, very nice, because someone had actually put some real thought into making sure that the on-campus students are looked after. I do wonder, you know, there are many, you know, especially with Indian students, we know that many of them prefer to stay off campus and with friends and in accommodation where, you know, social distancing might be quite difficult. You know, wearing your lawyer's hat on, really, I mean, do institutions have the liability to kind of look out for those students who are off campus, or is it just the on-campus students that they personally?
I think, well, in my university, we did have we had a residential life team who really focused on campus students, but we did also include, we had a residential life officer who looked after our off-campus students, so they could access support from the university, but they've got private legal contracts with their landlords. And I was reading something the other day. Many universities are giving relaxing rent payments, and so are some of the large third-party providers to help students who may have lost their jobs and not be able to pay, or who've maybe left the accommodation because it's been closed down, and they're refunding it. If you're living in a private, rented accommodation, there may not be that flexibility. And I was reading a piece from a landlord who was writing saying, we're not monsters, but this is something that, we are using, this is our income. So it was a very heartfelt sort of plea to say that we will try, but we ourselves have challenges. And this is where governments can help. And I know some governments are saying that there has to be a 3-month moratorium on sort of people being harassed for rent or expected to pay rent. So there are things that can be done. And I think it's about advocacy. If students have problems in private rented accommodation, as it always is when students have problems and they have them in a non-COVID world, it's about supporting them, being their advocate, helping them with good advice and maybe negotiation to see how you can get a solution with the challenge that they're facing.
That nicely, kind of segues into this financial stress and, some solutions around that. We have seen a fair few case studies from Australia and New Zealand coming through, because they have had 8 weeks head start over others of universities putting together funds that can be accessed, equal rights to international students as well, given for them to access those funds. There are universities that are trying to give weekly advances towards money that they can spend on groceries. I saw a package of $25 for groceries from a particular institution. So I think financial stress, even otherwise for international students, is very much a factor, especially when you are spending in currencies that are far stronger than your home currency. It really hurts, even to lose out on a day's wages if you are doing a part-time job and so on. In these circumstances, I think, are there some practical solutions as an institution you would recommend universities and colleges consider?
Yeah, I think, many of our universities have hardship funds that are there throughout the sort of the normal academic year. I think we need to look at those funds, at how they can be distributed in a slightly different way, maybe, to support this particular challenge that we've all got. So looking at how you're managing and monitoring and allocating your hardship funds. I think there are some examples of where philanthropic funds have been raised to support international students, and certainly in countries where you've got a diaspora, for particular, where you've got lots of international students who've now settled and moved on to their careers, you may find people willing to contribute if you are going to do some fundraising with your development colleagues and your colleagues in the fundraising department in your university. So actually doing something around that, if you haven't got a large hardship fund already there, the university could allocate additional funds. You will also have a situation, for example, in Ireland. One of the things that I thought was excellent was they set up their national COVID-19 fund for people who lost their jobs, and lots of people have lost their jobs in catering and retail, and that's where lots of international students have their part-time jobs. So the Irish government has made it possible for international students to apply for support from that fund. So that is an example of a government really ensuring that they step in to take care of their national reputation for looking after students. And that's one of the key messages of Ireland's offer to international students, that it's a friendly country where people care about you. And so that is an example of where that message has been followed through. Other countries may be doing that. I'm not saying that they aren't, but that's just one example at the moment.
And obviously for international students, visas and immigration become quite critical at this point in time, especially when there is disruption. So we know, we've heard of cases where students are concerned that if they start their program, say their first semester online, what happens to their ability to get a post-study work visa, primarily because it rides upon the fact that, okay, they have spent 30 weeks on a program and then they become eligible. But out of the 30 weeks, if they have spent 8 weeks or 12 weeks on an online program, that becomes problematic. And then there are obviously instances of students who are not able to kind of finish the program in time, and then their visa is going to run out. So there are other issues as well that we should be thinking about, right, Delia?
Yeah, and many countries have moved to sort of reassure students, as people will be aware of their particular country who's made a change, and countries have sort of automatically extended visas. So anyone who had a visa running out in March has had a 2-month extension in one country that we're aware of. I know in the US there was reassurance around visas given as well very early on when this happened, about what would happen if I'm moved on to online and I'm not fulfilling my classroom commitments. So there is flexibility there. I think this is where the sector bodies need to work with the immigration agencies and lobby for the interests of international students, and to make sure that this huge anxiety is alleviated as much as possible. And so there are examples all around the world of steps being taken to address that. But I think that it's also about things like Lakshmi mentioned, which is I came on the expectation that I would be able to stay for post-study work, and now I'm not going to necessarily be there for this time that I need to be. So there are those sort of things. And then the other thing, the students who are thinking of coming, is where lobbying will be helpful, will be around requirements for bank loans and evidence of that, because banking systems have slowed down. So there's lots of things that can be done with lobbying and with sector bodies advocating for international students.
So, as you and I are on a weekly basis talking to our staff members, some of whom stay on their own, and we have made it a point to kind of check in on them at least once in a couple of days. I do think that one of the key challenges that institutions will face is about kind of building communities online and being very deliberate about that, because I think in the first 2 weeks, everybody is quite enthusiastic about kind of doing this in a deliberate fashion, but we also have to clearly think through the consequences of this extending over several weeks, and then students are isolated. So we have seen some good examples of universities becoming very deliberate about conducting weekly check-ins with students, so that there is a sense of community. There is keeping in touch with students to make sure that they are pointed to online resources if they have mental health issues. Even with some of our colleagues, we have heard about anxiety and stress of being kind of cooped up in a flat on their own, not knowing how to cook. I mean, we have had all of these case studies even within our own kind of lockdown of just 2 weeks, and these are individuals who are so far away from home, and hence it becomes really, really important to look at this aspect where students should not be left on their own to combat their loneliness, and their well-being should be put at the heart of what you are trying to do. Everybody is trying to cope in this situation. one thing that I do kind of worry about, Delia, is about healthcare, because we know that healthcare systems in many of the recipient countries are quite overwhelmed at this point in time. So do you have any kind of suggestions around that?
Yeah, I think it's all about information and communicating to students where they can get that help. So it's really important to have some top quality information for students, signposting where they can go depending on what their condition is, making sure that you are linked in with the local health authorities and the public health. So should a student be feeling unwell and need to isolate or have treatment, then it's very, very important that that's done as swiftly as possible. And the contact tracing is done, so they would need the university to collaborate and cooperate with them there. And that's something certainly that I was involved in when we had, sometimes you would have a contagious disease, TB is one I think of, where sometimes a student would come and then public health would have to trace all those contacts. And of course, it's on a much bigger scale now than that is. Healthcare differs all around the world, so we're not going to suggest that, there is a standard. So students will have their healthcare that's in place, because one of the key things for all international students when they arrive in a country is that they've made that arrangement. But supporting them with advice and guidance and help of where to go, because navigating a new healthcare system, I know that having lived in India. When I first moved to India about 3 years ago, I suddenly realized that I had no idea if I needed to go to see the GP that I would have gone to see at home. And it's a very different system in India, lots of different sort of places to go to. So helping students understand how to navigate your healthcare system in a time of crisis, because this isn't even how to navigate it when it's just normal. So that's very important to think about how they're signposted. If a student is sick, communicating with their family as well, because they will be very, very anxious. So that's where this compassion, kindness, care comes in. Is it's not just the student that's standing in front of you. And of course, we have to be conscious of that student being an independent adult and having to have their permission, but trying to be that bridge for the family back home who might be very, very anxious, but within the confines of privacy, confidentiality that any student is entitled to. And that can be difficult sometimes. Because there are different ages. I mean, if you're a parent in India, you have, you are making choices about your children to far later stage in their life than you are in the UK or the USA. So it's about, that is something I think that's important in this section. And then if a student needs to isolate, making sure that the halls of residence, and again, one of the things that if you are keeping your halls open, students can be spread out. You can have physical distancing because you've got more space. If you've closed them and they've only got international students in them, you might want to consolidate, but you don't need to have 6 people in a 6-person flat. Spread them out. It might be a little bit more difficult to manage, but you can actually support the flattening the curve, which is very, very important, because the way students live is a way that can actually increase the spread of this virus. So that's really important. I just wanted to pick up on some of the points on the previous slide that I wanted to talk about, which is, Lax, if we could go back, the weekly check-ins. That's something that one of our universities in the South Island of New Zealand, the University of Canterbury, is doing a weekly check-in with all students. Which not everyone can do, but is something to think about. And another one that I really liked was one of a UK university I know, the University of Sussex. They've got fantastic sports facilities that are now all closed. Nobody can go to them. So they've moved it all online. All those classes are being held online, and they are promoting that throughout the community as a way of combating loneliness, supporting well-being, and making sure that people have got those communities. So that's another great idea. Another university's library has moved into daily book book clubs and things like that. So people are doing lots of different things. The other thing is to work very closely with your NUS and your international student societies. They have got, you know, resources that can help in this area. And if you support them and work with them, I think you will see a huge benefit to that. And that will also, you know, help with keeping in touch with students. We've already touched on that. And the other thing that is very important is that anxiety and stress. We're very lucky now that, you know, the recognition of mental health and how people need to be supported is very much more mainstream than it used to be. But some of our international students come from cultures where it's not that's not the case. And I've certainly experienced that as a Dean of Students. So it's about being sensitive to that and approaching that from that cultural background. But there are resources that are online. You can, you know, your counselling service will certainly be able to do one-to-one counselling virtually. It's not necessarily as great as doing it face-to-face, but it's very, very effective. And, you know, we've even got now online health consultations. So they're just some of the things I wanted to talk about there.
So we thought, you know, as part of this webinar, we started compiling some acts of kindness that we are seeing around the world to safeguard and protect the interests of international students, which we would bring out and circulate to the attendees so that, you know, you can pick up some ideas. There might be things that, you know, you are already doing. Here we have just shown you a selection of you know, items of news that we are coming across. For example, our client MCPHS in Boston, you know, has looked at kind of supporting students who have lost their part-time jobs as a result of COVID-19 situation. They've said that, you know, they will support those students. The university has opened campus hostels for students, and you know, they have said that those who were staying off campus can come and stay on campus. So, you know, these are amazing acts by international universities to try and support students in a time of crisis. You know, Auckland is another exemplar where not only have they kind of set up this COVID hardship support fund, they've also looked at kind of, you know, personalized learning plans for each one of their, you know, students who are kind of sat somewhere. I mean, these, you know, institutions are moving mountains to support international students and also, you know, home students. And there are other examples here of University of Leeds has said that, you know, they will cancel, they will allow students to cancel their accommodation contract if they are not using the accommodation contract. So allowing students to come out of the contracts in a time of need, because they would have then access to those funds to do something else or move somewhere else to stay where they are closer to family and friends. We have heard of cases of Indian diaspora opening up their homes to stranded Indian students. And these are getting widely reported here in India of acts by Indian diaspora. And, you know, there is a close watch on how students are being treated because we have heard of, you know, it was reported in our papers of Indian students turning to the embassies and High Commission for flights to come home because they want to be with their family rather than kind of, you know, staying on campus. And it's very important to make sure that you stay connected to the students so that any shift in, you know, in the narrative, despite all that you are trying to do for them, there are other narratives that could get spoken about, and hence it becomes very important to stay close to the students and making sure that they are aware of the resources that have been put together by the institution to help them. Delia, would you like to add something there?
Yeah, I was just going to say that's one message that we are going to leave you with, as well as the kindness message, which is about communication. I think it's communicate, because you can never do too much at the moment, because you know, you will always have someone who'll have a question or who won't understand. So I think that's one of the key things, is make sure that you're working with your comms teams to get good information out, both online, but also use, you know, phone calls, check-ins and things like that. I saw that someone was asking about how they do the check-in. They ring them up every week, and they've got a team of people that do that. They've spread it out across their teams to just to do that outreach. Yeah, so just you know, we know that our colleagues across the sector are doing amazing work, and there are some fantastic innovations happening, and fantastic stories of support. So this is just about now opening it up to you. So any questions or any comments or any sort of examples of what you're doing? Oh, we have to do it this way because you can't speak. I think I saw a question that was about how are the counsellors trained in the area where we were talking about. Yeah. Well, I mean, university.
Vivek asked that question.
Yeah. Oh, Vivek. Hello. It's I think universities are very committed to ensuring that when they are supporting students, that they've got professional staff to do that. There is also lots of resources. Certainly, if in the UK, there is an amazing, you know, the organisation UKISA has incredible resources for training international support, as does NAFSA in the US. So there are bodies all around the world where professional expertise is developed to support international students.
Yeah, so you know, in these times, I would say that as you rightly said, Delia, it's about communication, transparency, so that, you know, people are aware of what's happening, and focusing on the needs, because needs vary by nationality and you know all of that. So it's not easy. No one is thinking that this is easy. So, but focusing on the needs of the students, and this is also, you know, being a time to become very active on your social media, because people now only have access to television and social media to access news, because there is no other way they are going to get that by, you know, picking up a newspaper. So social media presence of the institution, you know, creating channels of communication is very, very important, and making sure that your social media assets are not running fallow, but you know, you are populating it with relevant content. Talking to the right kind of stakeholders would be extremely important. And one more point that I would want to leave you with is, you know, the community, because your community consists of people who are diaspora of, you know, various nations. There could be local MPs and, you know, other political stakeholders who could be quite influential in kind of getting the message across and making sure that the students get the right help at the right time. So
I just wanted to answer one question, because I think it was a really important one. The question was about what institutions who don't have enough resources to provide all this specialized support, how can they do their part to support? And that's, you know, I think that's a fantastic question, because it's one that lots of people will be grappling with. I think just to pick up on the point that Lakshmi was making, bring in your International Student Society, go out to the staff body and look for volunteers. The International Student Societies themselves are incredibly supportive of each other, and if you can sort of organize them and support them, then I know that they will contribute in that way. And then the wider community, the diaspora on your doorstep. I always found that incredibly helpful when I reached out to our local communities. They were more than willing to support students. Also, other bodies that can help. But yeah, it is a challenge. And then the other thing is access our sector support. So, reach out to colleagues in the sector, ask them for help. I think what we've seen throughout this crisis is people are so willing to help. But yes, it is a real challenge when you are small and you don't have, huge teams of people to swing into action. But ask for help and look in the places that I've just mentioned.
We have a question about, striking the right balance of kindness while communicating with students and protecting revenue models.
That's one. Where was that question?
Anshika has asked that question. And
Anshika, okay.
And I was just saying that, this goes beyond revenue models, doesn't it?
I think
these international students have been the source of revenue for a large majority of institutions.
And I would like to answer that, Anshika, because I used to wear those two hats, because as Director of International, and I was very much responsible for the revenue modeling there, and also as Dean of Students, I had my student support and my sort of caring hat on. And the balance that you used to get there was the fact that supporting your students, giving a fantastic student experience to the best of your ability and looking after them actually supported your revenue model. It doesn't cost a lot of money to be thoughtful and kind and have compassion. Sometimes it was just walking the dog on a Sunday, talking to a student who was wandering around the campus early. I had that privilege because I lived there. But so this can be, and I don't like to say this, but this can be an investment, and looking after your students will enable you to protect your revenue model, and you can do a lot with limited resources. So it doesn't need, huge amounts of money to think and care and try and put yourself in the other person's position and how you would like to be helped. Some universities have got more money than others.
Thank you all very much for participating in this webinar. Delia and I have really enjoyed putting this together. And we have enjoyed having you, and thank you for all the questions and your participation. We will circle a lot of questions around circulation of this PPT. We will be sending it out to all of you who have attended this either your mornings or in the afternoons, as the case may be. Delia and I are kind of going into our late evening. So thank you so much. Have a good weekend. Stay well, stay safe, and see you on the other side when we emerge from this pandemic.
And flatten that curve, okay? Wherever you are.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.